Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me this evening. I just want to say that I was actually a last-minute swap out. So Amy Keith from Common Cause is a very good friend of mine, and also she's my roommate when we live in Tallahassee. And she wasn't able to come tonight, and so she called me and asked if I could cover this, and I was like, of course we can. We're basically interchangeable, Amy and I. We're radically progressive white women in our 40s. So yes, absolutely, we're the same person. So I'm covering this for her, and I kept kind of the heart of her presentation so that I made sure to cover what Amy was going to talk about, and then just added a couple of Florida Rising's priorities as well. And since this is what we call a C3 space, that means like our discussion is not going to be partisan. We know what our policy priorities are. We know what we stand for, but that is not in support of one party or another. We prioritize putting people over profit. We prioritize the protection of civil rights and liberties. And my organization, Florida Rising specifically, we work in historically marginalized communities, especially Black, Brown, immigrant, and LGBTQ communities. We are a member-based organization, which means that you can become a dues-paying member of Florida Rising. And then members set our campaign demands, what campaigns we're running and what we want to change about the state of Florida so that it's more representative of those communities. Also, they set my legislative agenda. I present them with kind of a policy menu on here's what we can work on that speaks to the statewide campaigns that we have, and they vote on what our policy priorities will be. So all of that is reflected in this as well, but like I said, I really want to report back what Amy was going to cover in her Common Cause presentation. There will be not as much criminal justice issues covered tonight. I want to mention that it is definitely a focus on voting rights and civil rights, but we can talk about whatever you want to. This can be as long or as short as you would like. I do not mind. We can have a whole long conversation. I would say just because they are recording me, if you do want to pose a question, make a comment, raise your hand, and then I'll repeat it into the mic so that we pick up the audio for it. But I do not mind stopping and chatting as we go. So that's all good. So me, I'm the Senior Director of Policy and Research at Florida Rising. I am a transplant to Florida. I moved here from the Midwest, which is home, and I've been here for the past 5 years. I am coming to you fresh out of Tallahassee, which is where legislative session happens. Of course, as the state's capital, our state representatives and our state senators go to Tallahassee each year for legislative session, which is sort of like your Congress people going to Washington, D.C., where they pass new laws for the entire country, but your state reps and your state senators are passing laws just for the state of Florida during legislative session. That's what we're going to talk about today. We had an exciting week in Tallahassee. There was regular session, and then there was special session, and it was special to cover redistricting. So we got a little bit to chat about that too. But let me go ahead and tell you where things stand right now. So regular legislative session started in January. It ended March 13th, which we call sine die. Just means it is the official end of legislative session. So all of the policy bills ended at that point. There were 1,896 bills filed in total, huge amount of bills. There were 237 passed. Now that sounds like a lot, but it was actually kind of a slow year for our legislature. They did not pass a ton of new legislation. That's neither good nor bad, that just is. The bills that passed are in the process now of being sent to the governor, and he has 15 days to act, or the bill just automatically becomes law without his signature. He can veto a bill, which then sends it back to the legislature, and they need a 2/3 supermajority to override a veto. They don't usually do that because the same party is in power in the governor's office, the House, and the Senate, so they don't override governor vetoes very often there. It has happened, and it was drama when it did. But if he doesn't sign it or veto it, then it just automatically becomes law without any action. So that's where we're at right now. Passing a budget by June 30th is the one thing they had to do, and it is the thing they did not do. So we still don't have a state budget. Like I said, they finished regular session, but they have told us now they will come back for a special session for the budget that's scheduled to start May 11th. So that's what we're waiting for. They do have to pass it before June 30th, because if we get to July 1st with no state budget, we would go into a state government shutdown at that point. So fingers crossed they do get this done. As I mentioned, all policy bills that didn't pass are officially dead. However, we're paying close attention because sometimes policy is shoehorned into the budget. If you can get it funded, you can make it happen. So the budget can become a place where items are actually made real. They're effectively made into policy because there is money to do it. And then, of course, special session on redistricting taking place this week. They actually took their final vote. I'll go into what happened. It started yesterday. They were in Tallahassee these past 2 days, and I'll tell you what was going on there. Major wins for us, for Common Cause and Florida Rising this last session, were that there were a bunch of bills attacking the education and economic prosperity of immigrant families. Those all died. So there were no new anti-immigrant laws passed this session. There were several proposed, they were heard, a couple made it through their committees, but none were actually passed. There were some good voting rights bills, voting rights restoration specifically, bills that moved. One was by Senator Bracy Davis, which passed the Senate. There was another one that passed the committee but didn't get all the way through the Senate. Those will be reintroduced. Those two bills specifically, what Senator Bracy Davis's did, it added to the sentencing scorecard clear instructions on how to restore voting rights. You may remember that in 2018 in Florida, we passed Amendment 4, which said that if you have a prior felony conviction, you can have your voting rights restored. That was immediately undermined by the legislature. They came back next session and said, well, okay, we can't rewrite that constitutional amendment, but we're making it so that you have to have all your fines and fees paid before you can restore your voting rights. And everybody said, okay, how do I find out if my fines and fees are paid? And the state government just said, no. And that's how it's been since 2019, is people are struggling to find out if their voting rights are restored, if they are eligible to register to vote. Senator Bracy Davis, her bill clarifies that on the sentencing scorecard. What the other bill did that didn't make it all the way through the Senate, it was sponsored by Senator Polsky, is it actually created a statewide database where returning citizens could check and see if their fines and fees were done, were paid off, and their voting rights had been restored, so they were then eligible to vote. So providing the information that people in good faith, they want to participate. But they want to do it properly. They want to do what's legal. They don't want to get in trouble. And the state is not providing that information to them right now. So creating that database would make that information accessible, and everybody's clear. Everybody knows whether or not they're eligible. There was a bill to restore Confederate monuments and prevent the removal of Confederate monuments with the upshot that if a mayor ordered the removal of Confederate monuments, that mayor could be removed. That was specifically targeted at my mayor, Donna Deegan, because she removed the last Confederate monument from Jacksonville. And there are folks in Duval County who want to see those monuments restored. This bill was defeated yet again. It's come back a few years in a row, but it was defeated. All bills attacking medical decisions, reproductive health, Medicaid, Medicare, by expanding H.R. 1, which was the federal big beautiful bill, those all died. Those would have all made privacy in healthcare, accessing healthcare, affordability of healthcare harder. And so all of those bills were defeated. Most bills attacking LGBTQ Floridians died. There is one major exception we'll talk about. And then the labor pool expansion passed the Senate and will be reintroduced. Labor pool it's already in statute, and it primarily protects the labor rights of day laborers and temp workers and hourly workers. This is especially important for returning citizens who do comprise a lot of these temp workers and day laborers. The labor pool protects them from labor abuses. There is a bill that's been proposed that actually expands these protections and makes sure that they really are getting adequately compensated, that they know what their rights as workers are. It had some good progress, and it did get through the Senate, so we're going to try and bring it back next year. Hopefully it makes it all the way. Am I going too fast, or are we doing good? We're all right? Okay. I'll I'll catch a train and just ride it to the end if I'm not careful. Some other wins, a priority for League of Women Voters is pre-registered students can volunteer at polling locations. So, some students before their voting age, they pre-register so that when they hit 18, they're good, they're ready to go. Those students can now actually volunteer at polling locations. So they cannot be paid poll workers, obviously. They need to be, they need to be of eligible age for that, but they can volunteer. Something we were watching closely this session was a priority of Governor DeSantis, which was to reduce or eliminate property taxes. There were several resolutions introduced and they all died. But here's some important things to note. A special session may be scheduled. DeSantis keeps saying there will be one. And the House Speaker and the Senate President have been a bit more reluctant. They are not getting along terribly well. You may remember I said historically low number of bills passed. It's one reason. The boys are not playing well together. There are possible iterations, one of them passed the House but never made it through the Senate, where there could be no ad valorem property tax on homestead exemptions other than school budgets. That's the one that actually moved. And what that says is basically if you have a homestead exemption, which means you live in the house that you own. It's not an investment property, it's not a rental property. You already get a tax break. This proposal would have said that you eliminate the property taxes on that property gradually, except for school budget taxes. That's the one that made it through. Now, the issue with this one is it was the second most expensive proposal that was proposed, the second most expensive resolution, I should say, House Joint Resolution that was proposed. And it would slash local budgets. It would mean that what local budgets are then trying to do is they are going to go from having a pie to having a sliver of pie. And now they have to parse that sliver of pie out through public health programs, libraries, public parks, housing diversion programs. At Jacksonville, we recently lowered our local property tax, and that cut our eviction diversion program and our Meals on Wheels. So the problem is when you slash these taxes, in my community, that's literally going to mean more homeless people and more hungry people. This is the issue with taking away the most stable revenue source that Florida has, because we don't have an income tax. So guess what? Property tax is a major and very stable source of revenue for the state. If that goes away, you either cut a massive amount of programs or you have to come up with a new source of revenue. What's your first guess? What would that source of revenue probably be? Sales taxes. 100% it would be sales taxes. So yes, you save $100 or so every month off your property taxes, and then your sales taxes are 25%. Because there has to be a makeup of the shortfall somewhere. So it's really a cost shift, which is why we opposed it, because it didn't provide any real benefit to working class Floridians. It might provide some benefit to some extraordinarily wealthy people who, have multi-million-dollar homes that they get a cut on. But my biggest concern is the people who are struggling. And eliminating property taxes does not help them. It just shifts their cost over to something else. So anyway, so we're relieved that didn't make it through regular session, but we do expect a special session at some point this year. Let's talk about voting rights. We got to talk about the big bad bill. This was HB 991 is the voter purge bill that passed. This is a Florida version of the SAVE Act. Have people been hearing about the SAVE Act that's been going through Congress? Okay, so this is Florida's version of that. And it will remove thousands of eligible U.S. citizens from the voter rolls, and it will prevent eligible citizens from being registered to vote. How does it do that? It requires documentary proof of citizenship as one piece of this bill. This bill has a few things, but one major thing it does is called DPOC, or documentary proof of citizenship. Now, fun story, I've already had an experience with this. Like I said, I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Kansas City. And when I moved back to Kansas to take care of my grandparents in 2014, my grandpa was visually impaired, so I took him to vote and I was able to assist him. You can help someone with a disability when they go vote. So I was helping him vote, and I was like, well, let me register while I'm here. We were at the county clerk's office. And I had my utility bill, I had a photo ID because I already had a driver's license from moving back, and so I went to register. And they said, well, where's your birth certificate? I've lived in like 6 states in the US and I've registered to vote in all of them. Nobody ever asked me for my birth certificate. I was like, I don't know. I'll have to call my mom. And they're like, well, you have to have that or a passport or you can't register. And I was so taken aback by that because, again, no one had ever asked me for that before in any state, but it turns out it was because of the Kansas SAFE Act that had passed. And they were requiring documentary proof of citizenship, proof that you are an American citizen. Now, I am the daughter of a veteran. I was born on an Army base in Missouri. My voting eligibility has never been in question. But there was this extra documentary hurdle that I now had to clear. And of course, call mom. Mom, where's the birth certificate? She doesn't know. Long story short, I didn't get my birth certificate before the voting registration deadline, and I did not vote in 2014. And that was me and tens of thousands of other Kansans who were eligible but could not register because of this additional documentary hurdle that they had to jump through. That is what we're now putting in place in Florida. Now, it is a little bit different now because we have Real ID. And the majority of people with Real ID are going to be okay because they have had to verify their citizenship in some way. But if you don't have Real ID, DHSMV is going to do a run through their database. And if they don't have on record that you verified your citizenship, or if you have a name that they don't recognize in their database, like say you're married, divorced, change your name, then they will take you off the voter rolls and they'll contact you and say, you got to come in person and show us your passport or your birth certificate before you can be re-registered to vote. And anyone going to register for the first time needs to have those documents. So that is why we really fought this, is because it's quite a high hurdle to clear. A passport is like $200, I think, to get, or something like that. And if you don't got your birth certificate, you have to request it. You got to pay for it to come from another state a lot of times, right? So this amounts to a poll tax for a lot of people. I see a hand, yes.
So, the Florida bill specifically, do they state in it, or I should say in it yet, about a time frame? Because there were women in Texas who went through this, who re-registered and then went to vote, and then they were told, well, your vote's not going to count because your time period's not done.
Mm-hmm.
They were holding their registration for like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And if they registered 10 days before, their vote didn't count.
Yes, that's correct. So I'm going to repeat just for the sake of the audio. The question is there a time limit or a time frame in which you can provide those documents to re-register? Because there were cases in Texas where women were taken off the voter rolls, showed their documents, thought they were registered, but then went to vote and discovered that they weren't. So the answer is yes, there's a time frame. It's 30 days. You're going to be informed, and you're going to have 30 days to cure.
And you have to do that 30 days prior to the election.
And you can't miss the registration deadline.
Yeah.
Because say you decide to do that in October, it's too late. You will have missed the registration deadline, and you will not be able to actually register in time to vote. Now, here is the thing I do want to say. Okay, it is signed into law. This is a law now. DeSantis signed it, but collective action and really talking to them about like the administrative burdens that this was going to cause for not just us, but also the supervisors of elections and the DHSMV. They have to scan all of these records. We were able to push back the effective date. So it's now going to take effect in January of 2027, so it does not impact the 2026 midterms. I just want to be super clear on that. You cannot be removed from the rolls in 2026. In 2027, you need to get your documents in order and make sure everything's good. But it does not go into effect until after the midterms. And there are, of course, going to be, there are pending legal challenges to this bill. Because that law I told you about in Kansas that prevented me from voting, it's already been litigated. There was a case called Fish v. Kobach, where they decided that it violated the National Voter Registration Act because the hurdle was too high for people to clear, and it was burdensome for people to actually have documentary proof of citizenship. So, yeah. So this was the one that we really put a lot of energy into defeating because of the impact that it has on ballot accessibility and voting rights. Yes, go ahead.
What's the likelihood, though, of the legal challenges that are going to happen in Florida that it really makes a difference?
and that the legal challenges are successful. So the question is, what's the likelihood of the legal challenges being successful? I'm not 100% sure, mostly because I have been paying attention to the way the courts are swinging, and they seem to be swinging much more in favor of the executive branch most times. I strongly and firmly, both as a person and in my professional position, believe in judicial independence, which means that the courts don't listen to the other branches of government, that they interpret the law true to the intent of the law. And what we are seeing is that as governors, presidents appoint more and more people who are willing to take decisions favorable to them and to the executive branch. So I'm not 100% sure. What I will tell you is that on its face, it's pretty clear to me that this is a barrier and that this is going to mean additional costs in order to access your ballot for the most impacted people, for the poorest people in Florida. And we even have Black elders alive today in Florida who don't have a birth certificate because they were barred from being born in white hospitals. And so they were barred from a hospital where they would have gotten a birth certificate and were born at home and have no document of that birth. What are they supposed to do when you don't have $200 to get a passport, and maybe you don't even want a passport because you're not leaving, right? And you don't have a birth certificate? That's the situation that we're asking people to figure out for themselves. And so to me, it's very clear that you are preventing eligible voters from voting, and that that is a violation of fundamental rights. So I am hoping that the courts will see that too.
Don't you have to have a passport, a birth certificate to get a passport?
The question is, do you have a birth certificate to get a passport? There have been people who have found ways around it. I don't know how. But yes, you normally do. You have to have, usually you have to have an official birth certificate for a lot of government functions, yeah. But we've always protected ballot access and registration because that is viewed as so fundamental to participation in a democracy that you can't make it too hard for people. If you make it too hard for people to vote, you're not really in a democracy. Like we're saying that the pillar of a democracy is free and fair elections. Well, if your democracy is not free because you got to pay for your documents, and it's not fair because it's going to disproportionately impact people of color, women who have been married or divorced, anyone who's ever changed their name, students who of course are the least likely to have these documents, then it's not fair either. So that to me is just the complete undermining of the intent of democracy and how it's supposed to work. Yeah, question over here.
Did this bill, like part of the national bill, included turning over all of the voter rolls? And there's been a number of states who have volunteered to do that, particularly GOP-led. I haven't heard that Florida has yet, have they?
So the question is that there are states that have been asked to turn over their voter rolls, and has Florida done that?
Well, and nationally it was part of this particular bill.
So nationally, the SAVE Act did not pass. Nationally, we don't have a SAVE Act. This is Florida's version of it. Yeah.
But it wasn't rolled into our version to turn it over, right?
No, because the state only has jurisdiction over its own voter registration process. Yeah, but I think that the presidential administration did ask certain states for their voter rolls. I don't think they even asked Florida for theirs because we have gone favorable, like the votes have always come out in favor of the current presidential administration, so they didn't have to challenge it. But they have asked certain states, and I think even specific districts, to turn over their voter rolls.
States, because they want the rolls to turn them over to DHS to use in the immigration issues.
For the immigration issues, yeah, understood what you're getting at. Yeah, so then with the attempt to identify people to the Department of Homeland Security, right? Yeah, so that's the other thing that is part of so I want to, present you, I obviously do not find the other side's argument convincing, but I want to present you with it, is that this is going to prevent voter fraud, that this is going to prevent non-citizens from voting. That was why it was proposed. Here's the thing, is that there is there have been studies and research, and so much information is out there to show that there is really basically no voter fraud, and non-citizens don't vote, and it's already a felony. If you are a non-citizen and you vote, it is a felony and you will suffer those consequences. So that law already exists. And when the sponsor was pressed to say, okay, well, where are Florida's examples of this, right? Tell us how many cases of fraud are we really preventing if we pass this? She was able to cite 2 legitimate convictions of non-citizens who voted in the state versus the tens of thousands of eligible voters who are probably going to lose their right to vote because of the passage. So that on balance is just, the math doesn't math. You're talking about 2 people who, I don't even know if they did it on purpose. They might have done it on accident, but 2 people who weren't supposed to vote, they did. They got convicted of it. The law caught them, versus so many other people who are going to lose access to the ballot.
I have a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
So, I know this has been legally challenged, and I know you want to move on. This is voter suppression on steroids. So, I know it's being legally challenged, and I'm hoping we'll be successful. I'm hoping. Okay, like you said, it's been going in the, where we are in quite a dire state here with the kind of support and control the Republicans have in the state of Florida, and for those who are not courageous and don't be on the side of what's right nationally, being polite about it. So I'm wondering, the question is this: will our social justice community be willing, while we're trying to deal with this legal battle, will they be moving forward and to make sure we're helping those who are most likely going to lose their voter rights unless we help them get their birth certificates? In that little place in Georgia was in the little box in Elvira's house from.
You just described a real situation. So the question is, we know that there are the pending legal challenges to this bill, but will social justice and civic engagement organizations help people make sure that they get access and are able to register to vote while this law is in effect? And I can answer that, and I know League of Women Voters can answer that, and everybody, yes, we will. There are already, like I said, we're really making sure people know this doesn't impact this midterm election, not 2026, but starting in 2027, we need to have voters educated. We need them to know what documents are required in order for them to register. So yes, there is a big grassroots movement to make sure that work is done and we help people access those documents. Yes, ma'am.
We do have specific information out here, an organization called Vote Riders.
Yeah.
And Vote Riders is helping individuals with financial support to make
Perfect. So outside on the League of Women Voters table, we have a Vote Riders information pamphlet to take about that. So thank you for that. All right, shall we talk redistricting? Are we ready? Oh yes.
Sorry, just last question. Especially seeing we've seen some bills like this struck down in other states, and I understand a lot of our courts are backlogged right now. What do we think the longevity of a bill like this is, feasibly seeing that it's not fully constitutional?
It is a great question, and we're getting a little bit out of my depth because I'm not an attorney. I talked to the attorneys about this morning, and they told me a little bit of the plan, right? And basically, if we get something called a preliminary injunction, then that could keep the law from being enforced and basically kind of hold it in the courts while that is being, argued by the lawyers before the judges. So if we get the preliminary injunction, that kind of freezes that law from going into effect, and we don't have to work around it. We let it all sort of work itself out in the courts. And from there, it's up to a judge's discretion. A judge can put a stay on a new law, and which basically means that it isn't in effect while they decide what they're going to do about it. But they also might not. They might let the law go into effect while they continue hearing the case, and that's really the judge's discretion. So I don't know which way that will go, but I do know they said, the lawyers who presented this morning said this will be tied up in litigation for probably a couple years at least. Like, we're talking about multiple years of trying to see this case through. because it'll get one decision in one court and it'll be appealed, and then you'll take it up to the next court, so it'll go on for a few years. Yeah. Great. Anything else that you all want to talk about with 991? I don't want to steamroll that because that was the big elections bill that passed this year, so I want to make sure. Okay. Yes.
So how would, say for instance, Democrat governor, we get a Democratic governor, would that governor be able to impact or have any type of impact or could implement anything concerning this map, or is this
Yeah, good.
what we have?
Yeah, so the question is, and just FYI, I'm repeating because they're recording me, so I'm just repeating the questions back so that it gets recorded. So the question is, if we got a different governor, if we got a Democratic governor, would that have any impact on the implementation of this law? Probably not is the answer. Because it's been signed, it's going into effect. It's now really up to the courts to say, okay, it won't go into effect. Other than that, it would require the legislature going back in another session and rewriting the statute and saying, we're just going to change the law so that this law doesn't exist anymore. So those are really the two paths. Governors do have policy priorities. They do have things that they propose to their legislature to do, and they could make this maybe they make voting rights a major policy priority. Maybe they advocate for passing the Florida Voting Rights Act, right? But they wouldn't be able to do anything just themselves as governor. It would require an action by the legislature, or it would require the court saying this can't be a law anymore. So, yeah. So one of the core principles of all of our organizations represented here tonight is fair representation. And we do have in Florida's state constitution the Fair Districts Amendment. It was passed in 2010, and it says you cannot do partisan gerrymandering. That's illegal. It is unconstitutional according to Florida's state constitution. Now, there's no federal law about that. You've been seeing Texas, California. They've been doing it, and they've been telling you what they're doing. They're saying, we want more Republican seats in Texas, we want more Democratic seats in California, we're gerrymandering to get that. They're telling you the story. There's nothing in federal law that prevents that. However, there is in Florida's constitution something that explicitly prevents that. You cannot gerrymander for partisan advantage. So the question is, are they gerrymandering for partisan advantage? All right, let's talk about it. So, this is our current district. This is what we have now. This is how we voted in 2024. And it is already the governor's gerrymandered map that was approved in 2022. You can see who has the advantage here. It's fairly clear, right? So they called a special session this week in which the governor proposed this map. So what we've got here is a map that would give Republicans probably, not for sure, depends on if y'all show up to vote, but would probably give Republicans 4 additional seats in Congress. So you can see what they did here is they're shrinking down the Central Florida, which is a significant Democratic base in the state. It was, let's see, Maxwell Frost would keep his seat, and then Darren Soto would lose his seat with the new gerrymandered maps. Kathy Castor's district over here on the side of the state, you can see is eliminated in the gerrymandered map. That would go to a Republican. And then here what they've done is they've tried to squeeze a few more out, and what this will probably leave is maybe one district for Moskowitz and Debbie Wasserman Schultz to fight over. Is it like either they both lose, or somebody moves to a different district and they duke it out there in the primaries, right? So either way, we're probably losing at least one Democrat down there. So that is the map that was voted on in the House yesterday, in the Senate today. It passed along party lines in the House. It did not pass strict party lines in the Senate. There were some Republican defectors who said this goes too far. We know it gives us more Republican seats in Congress, but we cannot vote for it. So there were 4 Republicans who voted no on these maps. But of course, that's not enough. So it did pass, and these are the governor's maps. So he will sign it. But again, this is redistricting specifically for Congress. And so that's our national representation. We'll be probably sending 4 additional Republicans to DC after the 2026 election, unless there is a legal challenge which says, you clearly did this for partisan advantage. Florida's Constitution says you cannot do that, so this map is invalid. That's the only way forward at this point. Yes?
Doesn't the Florida Constitution also say that you can't do mid-decade redistricting, so just a factual
Yeah.
timeframe thing also?
I don't, not explicitly, but it has to be tied to something. If you are going to redistrict, there has to be a nonpartisan reason, like a fact, something that significantly changed that you're like, okay, we have to, because the makeup of our state is so different because of this reason. Otherwise, it should be tied to the census that happens every 10 years, right? So, we all did the census in 2020. That's supposed to be the basis for whatever redistricting happens at the beginning of the decade. Mid-decade redistricting, it's very uncommon. It's really only happening because the Trump administration told states to do it in order to send more Republicans to Congress. And it's very uncommon. But it is not illegal, and it's not explicit in the Florida Constitution that you can't do it. You just have to have a reason. You have to point to well, this changed about the population, and so we have to. Yeah. And I think DeSantis is also relying on, I will confess that I don't entirely know what the logic is, but he's relying on the Calais decision that just came out of the Supreme Court that says that, that strips away some of the protections of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which allowed communities of color to have fair representation in Congress. So there was this case in Louisiana, the Calais case, where there were certain districts that were kind of safe Black congressional seats. And there were white voters who said that violated their right to fair representation, and so they challenged those maps, and that became the Calais v. Louisiana case, and the Supreme Court just said, you're right, you don't have to protect those Black districts. So what DeSantis is saying, well, because the Calais case changes what we thought the rules were about redistricting, that means we should redistrict now because the rules have changed. Never mind that he was, calling for the special session before the decision came out. But that's his claim, is that this has now changed the environment and we need to redistrict given the rules are different. Yeah. Yes.
This is going to cost money to redistrict.
Oh, for sure.
A lot of money. But will the money be spread out to all Floridians or just the Floridians that are in the impacted areas?
So I don't know that there's any money attached to it yet. They have to put it in the budget. So that I'm assuming that you're talking about the money that needs to go to the administrative costs for the supervisor of elections offices and how they're going to have to change everything. They're going to have to redraw precincts. Yeah. The budget still hasn't been set for the state, so they may be writing in an appropriation that would go towards that. And that's how I don't know how it will be apportioned because we haven't seen it yet. Currently, there is no funding mandate. But I have no doubt the SOEs are lobbying for there to be money attached to this because it is expensive to redraw all of those districts. It is likely to go towards the more heavily changed and the more majorly redrawn districts, more so than the other regions.
It would be better if every single Floridian felt the cost of this. In my mind.
It will, if your district doesn't change, you may not. But the most populated areas in Florida will absolutely feel this. Your precinct location is going to change. Your district is, your neighbor across the street from you might be in a whole different congressional district than you are now, right? All of that is going to shift in the population centers. Yeah. And I think you had your hand up as well.
Oh, I just want to make sure I understood. So it is being challenged legally or not?
It will be.
It will be.
There hasn't been, to my knowledge, there isn't a lawsuit filed yet, but considering that it's fairly obvious that this was done for partisan reasons, I mean, look, it looks like you took a red paintbrush and painted over Florida. You know, it's pretty evident, and so there will be a lawsuit brought on those grounds, yeah.
Democracy Docket has already promised the minute he signs that they're going to file their suit.
Can you repeat that?
Democracy Docket, Ezra Levine has already stated that the minute that he signs it, he's filing his lawsuit.
Yeah, yeah,
Return.
yeah. So yeah, there will be.
At
It's
least one, probably four.
there are people prepping for this for sure. Yeah. All right. We feel comfortable to move on? Did we dive deep enough? Have I painted a bleak enough picture yet? People love to see me coming after session. I show up, I'm like, I'm gonna tell you all the bad news, okay? Buckle up, here we go.
Need margaritas after this.
Right? I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to make sure that we got the bill number up on here. There was that restoration of rights voting database that did move. So that was sponsored by Senator Polsky. I do think that's going to come back. And it's like, at least what we can say is there are these bills that they're not getting across the finish line because they're not Republican priorities, but they are moving. They're being acknowledged as valuable. This had bipartisan support, like unanimous votes in favor of it. So people are seeing the need for it and why it's a good bill, regardless of party. There is also a special elections bill that I did not work, but Amy Keith worked, that requires the governor to call special elections in a timely manner to fill vacancies. You may have noticed that he's kind of shuffling his feet on some of those seats that he wants to leave empty for a while. And that leaves people without representation. That means you don't have anybody in the state legislature who's fighting for your region. You don't have anybody you can call. So there does need to be more timely decisions made on this. The governor does have a responsibility to make sure those elections happen so that you get someone who goes to Tallahassee on your behalf. And the Senate version had bipartisan support. It did eventually die in committee, but the fact that it moved is a good indication people are seeing the need to move this kind of policy forward. Good bills that are going to be back. This is our entire coalition has supported the Harry T. and Harriet V. Moore Florida Voting Rights Act for the past 3 years. This is kind of our elections love letter to the state of Florida. We all wrote this together to be an example of what should election law look like? What do we want voting in Florida to be like? What can we restore that has been peeled away from us in the past 4 to 5 legislative sessions? And so it provides stronger tools to fight voter suppression. It repeals bad elections laws, the laws that have made it harder for you to have representation, to register to vote, for third-party voter registration, like the League of Women Voters, to register voters, right? All of that become harder and more expensive in the past few years. And it expands access to the ballot for all eligible voters. It was heard in 2 committees as a strike all. So what happened was they had a bad elections bill that they were hearing, and the sponsors of this good bill, this Voting Rights Act, said, we're gonna file this as an amendment so that we get a chance to actually present it and advocate for it and have it heard in a committee in the House. So we did do that twice, and it was a very powerful moment, great moment to hear what your voting rights law might be if we had this kind of thing in Florida, you know? Another bill that we're hoping to see again is elections during emergencies. This is basically protecting disaster-affected communities. When you got to relocate because of a hurricane or a flood, this would provide flexibility for supervisors or elections to give support to disaster-affected voters in their counties. So things like being able to vote anywhere in your county instead of like in your specific precinct, right? Because people get displaced when there's a disaster. There was no movement this session. It did move last session, and it was amended into a bill in 2025, but it didn't do anything this year. But it will come back again in future legislative sessions. Want to talk about civil rights and civil liberties. This was a major bill that, again, impacts all of us. This bill was, some people called it a police state bill. or outlawing activism bill, but it was a bill package, HB 1471 and 1473. So what it would do is it gives the governor and the cabinet, along with the head of the FDLE, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the power to secretly designate advocacy and civil rights organizations, everybody in this room, okay, right, as domestic terrorists. And it's based on a product that's vague and discretionary. So Floridians who support these organizations, your members, your donors, your staff, would then be subject to felony penalties and expulsion from public universities. So the process is, the head of the FDLE decides he wants to designate an organization as a domestic terrorist organization, and like writes up the findings of evidence that you can't see because 1473 is a public records exemption bill. So it says that they don't have to show you any evidence that was considered when they considered whether an organization was domestic terrorists or not. They then present that, yeah, exactly. It's a way to get around the sunshine laws. Right. So, right, this is, yeah, NAACP absolutely has been here before. They will then present that to the governor and the cabinet and say, okay, approve designating this group as domestic terrorist. It's posted to a registration, and in the original version of the bill, they didn't even have to tell the organization. They would just post it to a registry. And unless you're someone who's checking the governor's registry every other day, you might not never know that you're a domestic terrorist. But now they have to actually inform the organization. The organization then has a 30-day statute of limitations to challenge that. And again, you can't see the evidence that was used to designate that organization. So you don't really know exactly what you're challenging, but you have to challenge it in court. So all of the due process that should come before the designation happens after you're already designated as a domestic terrorist organization. And it has been signed into law. It will go into effect July 1st. There are pending legal challenges to this bill, but one of the questions that's being answered is a question of standing. Like, do we have to wait for someone to be designated domestic terrorist before it can be challenged, or can it be challenged on its face? To me, this is a clear violation of like First, Fourth, Sixth Amendment rights. Like, it's got constitutional violation written all over it. So there may be a basis for challenging on that, but we're not sure if we actually need to have, like an impacted plaintiff before we can. I see one here and then one here. You want to go?
They have a plaintiff
Okay.
already, because they immediately went for the
So
group that they were
yeah.
talking before, so that would have someone who has standing, who, from what I understand, had been in front of a lawsuit, didn't they?
Yeah, so what happened, I believe you're talking about CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations. So what happened, they're the reason this law was written. What happened first is that DeSantis used an executive order to designate CARE, which again, that's CAIR, Council on American Islamic Relations, designated them a domestic terrorist organization. That executive order was legally challenged by CARE. SBLC did their legal representation. It was successful. So they said, well, you can't do this by executive order. Okay, then we'll pass a law. The law has not been challenged yet. The executive order was,
My
I'm
understanding
done.
is as soon as he signed it, he came out and said, hey, this is now.
Oh yes, that he will do it, yes. Oh yeah, the priorities are clear.
No, I think he already said it. He said it the same day he signed it.
But it's not in effect yet, so he can't do it until after July 1st.
Okay, because I just signed it. And
There's two, I think there's two things you're thinking of. The executive order, yeah, that happens.
I knew about that, but I thought he had said it straight out as soon as he signed it, here's what's going on.
Yeah,
But I was not aware of the deadline, so.
absolutely, we know he's going for CARE with this new law. Like, he already tried. They're going to be at the top of his list. His office also leaked that student protest groups were the other reason that they wrote this bill, is that they want to target student protesters. So, and part of the problem of this is we don't know what the remedy is. We asked the sponsor, let's say a student gets expelled for going to a protest or for donating to one of these organizations, but then the designation gets overturned in the courts. Does that student get reinstated? What if they were on a student visa and they were from outside the country? Does their visa get reinstated? Like, what happens to them? And the sponsor could not answer us. There was no explanation of like how this was actually going to be implemented and how there would be remedy if someone's rights were violated. Yeah, what's your question?
It's kind of what I wanted to touch on to see if you had I was curious because what we're saying, and I kind of touched on it earlier, but they're subverting a lot of our legal standings out of its
Yeah.
intended concepts. Even with public universities, they did something similar at my, well, former institution. But it was the Dear Colleague letter where they stated, kind of going back again, that these groups such as Black Student Association, Asian Pacific Islander, and many more to name, were infringing upon the rights of white and Asian Americans. And largely, we've seen action taken on that behalf, even if it was not put into law. So, what's the expectation when they're subverting a lot of these
Yeah.
things? Or what have you been hearing when it comes to that? Because a lot of them have been taken out of their legal standing and still being applied.
Yeah, the question is about legal standing and the subversion of a lot of civil rights and due process, and especially attacks on historically marginalized communities or programs like diversity, equity, and inclusion university programs that white students have said violates their rights to racial non-discrimination, right? I think the answer to what am I hearing about that, or like what's going on with that, varies state by state. It has definitely become a state level battle because that's kind of where they're trying to, because we know that you cannot successfully protect these rights in the federal courts right now. So there are things that are being stopped. For example, DeSantis' executive order was like, I'm just going to unilaterally say that this group is terrorist. Well, who brought the evidence? Where's the court of law that decided? Where's the due process for this organization, this nonprofit, that to defend themselves and say that is not the right way to characterize us? So the court said, yeah, okay, you can't do that. But now that there's a law saying that you can do that, it's a little bit harder for the courts who now have to interpret the law. And now the law says you can do it. So you have to rely on the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution, to protect you from that. And I think that since this has major due process problems with it, you're criminalized before you ever have your day in court, basically. I think that will be the nature of the legal challenge. I'm hopeful that that's a successful challenge because I think a reasonable person looking at this, I mean, you all know how it feels to have somebody say something about you that you weren't in the room for, and then you got to show up and defend yourself. And we're talking about doing this on a legal scale. We're talking about people literally being dissolved as an organizational entity and losing all of their donors, and their staff being told they're going to get felonies slapped on them. That's severe. That is severe and extreme, and so there has to be a better process. It can't just be this closed door meeting with the cabinet. It's got to be more than that before you give people this kind of drastic designation, like calling them a terrorist. Yeah. Yeah, another question?
Second part, I kind of just thought of this now, and I wanted to see how prevalent it was, but I know a lot of what was happening at the national level. They used the argument of emergency powers to act beyond the scope of what is traditionally allowed. Are we seeing that a lot at the state level too, to some degree?
To some degree, they didn't necessarily name it with this bill, but with a lot of immigration bills, they have claimed that. They're claiming that there's like an immigration emergency, and the governor has declared an immigration emergency that he gets to then appropriate a certain amount of the budget for, that then just becomes his piggy bank to kind of do what he wants with. So he's definitely weaponizing like the idea of a state of emergency on a state level. Yeah. Yes.
Do you have some more specific information on felony penalties? What are we talking about?
It's a first-degree felony.
First degree?
Yeah. It would, what would happen? I mean, again, talking with lawyers this morning, I was like, what will happen? And they said, we don't really know, but it will probably go designation, challenge, and then all the questions come, right? Because do you continue with dissolving the entity even while the challenge is in place? Can you expel a student at the end of that 30 days? And then what do? But assuming that the challenge is not successful, that they keep the domestic terrorist designation, the individuals associated with that organization would then be tried individually for felonies, for first-degree felonies. Just in terms of like reputation?
terrorist.
You mean?
Well, no. From my understanding is it's becomes like a security issue. People can't hire you, things like that, because
Oh, yeah.
you have
So
it charged and has a terrorist category to it.
let me clarify that. The question is does the domestic terrorism designation actually have like a much broader implication? Individuals are not designated as domestic terrorists. Only organizations are designated domestic terrorists. They're the ones that get the designation. Now, but the people who, the phrase is given material support to that organization, they can then have the first degree felony. Yeah, but they aren't called terrorists, but they're told, it is said that they have the felony of giving material support to a terrorist organization. Yeah. Good questions all. Let me know if I'm rolling too fast here. But I don't mind stopping to discuss it, so we can move at your speed. How are we doing on time though? Ooh, I've been talking a lot. Okay, all right. Let's roll through the last year. Okay, anti-diversity in local governments. A little bit what you were talking about with the attacks on DEI. Prohibits counties and municipalities from operating diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and prevents local governments from supporting community events like Pride. Now, the original version also had things like Black History Month, Juneteenth. We got exempted all federal holidays or state holidays. So things like Hispanic Heritage Month, those are all protected. But the more and more we pushed the sponsor on like, and Pride, the more he was like, no, I will not put that exception in. And so it was clear that the target of this bill was LGBTQ communities in Florida. So basically your local government may not be able to sponsor in, your county officials may not even be able to attend in their official capacity a Pride celebration, because that one was specifically named in the bill and was clearly a target. Other things were exempted, like protecting Black History Month, the Pulse Memorial, and cultural recognition events. But every time we got to LGBTQ issues, apart from the Pulse Memorial, which is established in law, everything else he was like, no, we're not exempting that. Yes?
When does it take effect?
This goes into, oh, that is a great question, because this one is January 1st. Yeah, this was one of the ones we pushed back. So this one and the voter purge bill are both going into effect January 1st. Most new laws usually go into effect July 1st, but there are exceptions if we think there's going to be there's a lot that has to change or a big rule shift, then you can get the effective date pushed back farther. Some good bills that didn't move, there was the Visible Act was introduced that required ICE agents to identify themselves. That was, had strong advocates fighting for it, but we knew that was kind of a messaging bill, that it was something to talk about more than something that would move. And then the Florida Economic Prosperity and Immigration Act would create offices for new Americans in the Department of Commerce. It would say that discrimination based on a person's immigration status is unlawful, which is constitutional, by the way. You can't discriminate against someone based on country of origin. You're a protected class. And revises harmful provisions of law. I added this one in here because Florida Rising also works on climate and environmental justice issues, and there was a bill that we are concerned about because it's greenhouse gas emission and net zero preemption. If you do policy work in the state of Florida, you have to learn the word preemption. Preemption just means that a higher level of government is preventing a lower level of government from doing something. So the state legislature, in this case, is preventing your county and your city governments from regulating greenhouse gas emissions. It says that they can't agree to any of the Paris Climate Accords or cap and trade policies, things like that. So this is passed and signed into law. It will go into effect July 1st. So like any local programs that you might have to monitor emissions, it would be pretty much impossible to enforce at this point. There were some good bills that they didn't move, but we're going to reintroduce them, that regulates the Public Service Commission. The Public Service Commission is who has TICO? Okay, TICO Utility, yeah, and then Duke, is that out here? That's out here too. Okay, FPL isn't out here though, right? So, okay, the big investor-owned utility companies in Florida are Duke, TICO, and FPL. When they want to raise your utility rates, they go to the PSC, the Public Service Commission, and they say, give us money, please. And historically, the PSC says, sure. They just approved the largest rate hike in history. It's going to give $7 billion to FPL. FPL doesn't have to show justification for this. They frequently just do it after a hurricane because their billionaire investors lost some money, and I'm sorry to all of you that are trying to recover from a hurricane, but your utility rates are going to go up so that they can still protect their investment. That has been the norm. These bills, there were 3 versions. One was introduced by Gates, one by Andrade, and then one by Carlos Guillermo Smith. This would have regulated the Public Service Commission, forced them to be more transparent, and forced investor-owned utility companies to give justification for why they're raising your utility rates. It did pass the committee, and then it died in the Senate. They will be reintroduced. Okay, needs improvement, artificial intelligence regulation. We all know AI is happening, whether we like it or not. We need to regulate it. This creates some measures to regulate AI, which is good. What it didn't do is it failed to protect Floridians from some of the key harms in related technology. Although given how much AI has been in the news lately, I think we're going to see some progress with this in future sessions. There was even a bill proposed by Senator Broder, the special session, that would prevent minors from using AI. That then becomes a First Amendment issue because in the ACLU would probably challenge it. But I don't know. I can see the argument for not wanting your kids on ChatGPT. Okay, so we got through the legislative. I'll give you a couple of QR codes to get further information. But does anybody want to discuss any more policy issues this evening? Because I kind of rolled through that last part pretty fast since we spent so much time on the voting bills and the domestic terrorism bill. Yeah. Yes.
I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah. What was your question? Oops.
Do you have handouts of your presentation?
I do not have this printed, but I can email it to you, Lori, and then provide a digital copy. Yes. What was your question?
So I guess when we're looking at a lot of how these laws can be approached or even potential solutions, what would be good states to look at that have, I wouldn't say successfully like challenged, but worked around whether it's been renaming or just restructuring just to be compliant while still providing the needs for their constituents?
So are you thinking particularly of like the voter purge bill, like staying compliant while still challenging it? Yeah, I think, like I said, Kansas, where I lived, Arizona also is another state that passed a version of documentary proof of citizenship. Basically, there are people who can vote in federal elections, but not in state elections in Arizona because of how this law is being implemented. So those are some states to look at. But mostly at this point, what we're seeing is an extreme, and you pointed it out, right? We're seeing an extreme push. We're seeing an undermining of some constitutional protections that we assumed were pretty solid. We're like, okay, we got due process. Surely we have due process. Now they're passing laws and they're doing things that make us think, oh, we don't got due process. It's going to be hashed out in the courts. It's really going to be lawsuits. And so I think there's kind of the three-pronged strategy. There's the try to fight it with better policy. You got a bad policy, write a better policy, right? So go that avenue. There is, and then there is the voter education that absolutely has to happen because we want people to get as much access as possible. Yeah, there's going to be some hoops to jump through, and yeah, some people won't make that hurdle. Students especially are not going to vote as much. But while we're looking at those people, we also need to find out who is really impacted and who can become plaintiff in a case. And when those people who are like, I really can't get around this because I really don't have a birth certificate are identified, we need to let them know that there are legal challenges and that they can participate in a lawsuit that would reverse the impact of this law. So I'd say that's the kind of the three ways. You got your policy, you got your community organizing, and you got your legal challenges are sort of the three ways to go about it. Yeah. Good questions. Thank you everybody for chatting so much with me and talking back to me. I love that. So to let you know, if you do want to become a member of Florida Rising, like I was mentioning, we have active campaigns. We have statewide campaigns. We also have local campaigns in St. Pete that we can connect you with. And our statewide campaigns focus on immigrant rights, clean air and holding those investor-owned utility companies accountable, judicial integrity, and voting rights. So those are statewide throughout Florida, and then there are local campaigns for clean air as well. So if you want to scan that, I do would welcome your participation, all of you, in getting involved with Florida Rising too. And then I want to, because I am here, we are doing a May Day action. It's quick turnaround, but if you want to, the website should give you that option too. If you are, let's see, we are in Pinellas, so May 1st from 12 to 2. If you want to, I'll put the slide back up and you can scan this QR code if you need to come closer, if you want to participate in a May Day action. And this I want to represent Amy's organization, since she was the one who was supposed to be here. If you want to participate in Common Cause's direct action, you can scan this QR code and that will connect you to Common Cause's website. And I just want to make sure Amy Keith got her code up here too. So thank you. Thanks, Devin. All right, I will sit myself down.